For many Americans, it's a little hard to see the humor in this political moment. The country's deeply divided and in turmoil, and that's not to mention an assassination attempt or an 81-year-old president who wants 4 more years and is home in Delaware with COVID. Kate Willet manages to be the voice of Americans who see Trump as too extreme and Biden as too old to serve. Willet posted on X, "The fact that such a winnable election is being ceded to fascists to protect one man is very heartbreaking. And I frankly can't imagine loving any politician so much I'd be willing to give up 350 million people's rights for him." End quote. And now while AOC and Bernie threw their support behind Biden, more centrist Dems like Adam Schiff and Pelosi are calling for him to step down. Willett put it simply, "I never really thought I'd be in a situation where I'm desperately hoping that Adam Schiff prevails over Bernie and AOC." Now, whether it's his handling of the war in Gaza, his cognitive decline, or failure to make good on some of the campaign promises that earned him progressive votes in 2020, that constituency is not one he can rely on in 2024. And here to break all of this down, the latest on the left, with us is Kate Willet herself. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So you and I have flirted with the idea of being coconut pilled on Twitter. This is a movement behind Kamala Harris replacing Joe Biden as the VP, as someone who used to be, I don't know, a Bernie bro. Being in the K-Hive is something I'd never consider. But this new thing, the coconut pilled army, is increasingly more alluring. And of course, that comes from her saying, "You think you fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you," which the more you think about, the more beautiful it becomes. Can you tell us a little bit about this movement that progressives are in?
So, I think that for progressives, and I would include myself in this, a lot of us have been, really hoping that Biden will step aside for a long time now. And, both because of his low odds of winning and also because of, what we see as horrific war crimes being committed in Gaza. And, I think that that kind of seems like a pipe dream, that it was either going to be like Trump or Biden, and probably losing to Trump. But, once I think a lot of people in the U.S. started to see some of what we were concerned about, which is, Biden's lack of competitiveness in this election, frankly. I mean, he's been down in the polls for like a year. Then all of a sudden there's this momentum to get another candidate. And I think people are feeling like, the easiest option would be to unite behind the vice president. The vice president exists to be able to step up and replace the president if something goes wrong. And, we all saw that debate. I think it's pretty clear that something is going wrong. And 75% of Americans agree with that at this point.
Why do you think the more progressive, more left-leaning figures like AOC and Sanders, et cetera, are sticking by Biden more so? That has frankly surprised me because, as you've pointed out, there's been a lot of left-leaning dissatisfaction with Biden for perceived betrayals on some policies like student loan debt cancellation. And then, of course, I know what's happening in Gaza very much animates people on the left. And yet, right now, it's the moderate centrists who are most against Biden in this political moment. I would not necessarily have predicted that. What do you think's going on?
I mean, I think, I can only speculate, but my guess is it would be like less likely to get any movement on this issue on Biden stepping down if this was perceived to be, somehow something like the Bernie bros were pushing for. So I imagine that factors into their decision. In terms of a lot of the people that you saw calling for Biden to step aside earlier in the process, they were, frontliners in swing districts whose seat might be really endangered by, Biden or whoever is at the top of the ticket not performing well. So I think part of it is literally just like people in these Congress people in these districts really want to win. And someone like Nancy Pelosi at this point is looking at the whole picture of the House, looking at, how much is at stake if Trump wins by a large margin and Republicans win the House and the Senate. But, I also think that, to kind of be more generous in my interpretation, I do think that AOC and Bernie and the progressive wing of this party really do have Biden's ear on progressive issues to one extent or another, except on Gaza. So, they came out with this tenants rights platform, 5% maximum rent increase. And it's like, that's amazing. I would love if it happens. But, I think to people on the left, like to not address the main issue, which is front and center for us right now, it's not going to do what they hope it will. We need ceasefire, or it's just not going to have that impact.
Well, Kate, maybe Biden just wants to seek another term because he really just wants to make good on those campaign promises he never got around to. Is that possible at all?
Well, I mean, it is wild because it's like he'll post this list of stuff that he could do in his first 100 days, and it's like, well, you're the president right now. I always think it's so funny funny in a sad way, when, these people who are in Congress or the literal president, is like, somebody should do something, they talk about it like they're, reply guys like me on Twitter or whatever, but they actually have the power to enact this stuff. I used to say that I dated alcoholic comedians for 10 years. And if there's one thing I became amazing at, it is seeing a man's potential. And I can see that the president has a lot more power than he's pretending to have right now. And I think, unfortunately, in order to excuse Biden from moral accountability for the horrors in Gaza, people have had to make this argument that oh, he just can't do anything. He can't do anything. He's just a tiny little guy with no power. It's personally, I think that's pretty ridiculous. But, to choose to, really hang on to this narrative that he's actually weak and being steamrolled, it feeds a narrative that really, I think, started with the botched withdrawal in Afghanistan, which is something that I supported withdrawing from Afghanistan, but there was a lot that went wrong about the actual process. And I think people do have concerns about his strength and effectiveness as a leader, partially because of his age, but also partially because there's been a lot of foreign policy to dramatically understate it, mishaps. And I think that the consequences of going with this he can't do anything narrative have not been great for him in the way that his supporters want it to be.
Do you think on Gaza that Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, either of them really would have a markedly different foreign policy from the Joe Biden? I mean, for Donald Trump could have maybe an even more aggressive, possibly less aggressive. I don't know. It's hard to tell what Donald Trump actually thinks about some of these issues, particularly on foreign policy. He has some non-interventionist tendencies, but put plenty of more traditionally hawkish people in his cabinet. And then Kamala Harris has some, in some ways, closer ties to Israel than even Joe Biden does. So I don't think there would even be much of a change in that policy, particularly so if Biden were to not be the president anymore.
I mean, you definitely could be right, and I think that there is a high chance that you are, to be honest. I'll tell you how I see this, and then describe just really briefly how I think some others on the left are seeing this. So Trump, I don't think anybody really thinks that he is going to be better. I personally really do not want Trump to become the president, especially because this issue is probably the most important issue to me right now because of the severe danger that people are in. And, Trump, when he used Palestinian as a slur at the debate, I don't see any reason to hope that this guy will be better. Although I do think that there are some people who are really, hoping desperately that maybe the non-interventionist America First slight streak would win out, or that he would get in some kind of personal beef with Netanyahu. Maybe Netanyahu would, call him ugly or something, and his narcissism would win out, or that his narcissism would win out, and hope he would come in and be like, I'm the guy who made a deal or whatever. I don't put a lot of faith in those hopes. I don't think that that's what's going to happen. I think that his foreign policy would be extremely similar to the Biden administration because, as I see it, the policy has been whatever Netanyahu wants to do, even if Biden is leaking that he's, secretly disappointed about it. With Kamala Harris, I think where people are finding, some very cautious hope is the fact that she has demonstrated in the past that, I don't know if she is it's very hard for me to tell where she actually personally stands on the issues, but in her 2020 run and in her Senate career, she seemed to get that progressives and the left and young people were a constituency that it would benefit her to win over. So she co-sponsored Medicare for All. She, during the pandemic, like the beginning of the pandemic, excuse me, I'm like pulling a Biden here. She called for, $2,000 checks. And she seems to get that it would be advantageous to her to be somebody that the left is on board with. Now, will that win out? I don't know, but I think people see maybe more hope of pressuring her than Biden, who is super ideologically committed to, maximum no, what word am I looking for? He doesn't want to push back on Israel at all. There's that article that Mehdi Hassan wrote noting Biden's conversation with Prime Minister Begin in the 1980s about, how Biden would actually want, less restrictions on civilian death than the prime minister. And, I think Biden has just really been a super hawk on this for a long time. So I think people are thinking okay, maybe really any other Democrat would, obviously not cut off Israel or anything, but be willing to, maybe apply the Leahy law or something, these kind of basic common sense restrictions on hey, you can't use these weapons to violate international law. You can't block aid. I mean, it's a minimal hope. I don't think anybody is thinking that this is a sure bet or whatever. But at this point, out of Harris, Trump, or Biden, there's a cautious Harris.
Yeah, Kate, I appreciate the comparison here of Joe Biden to sort of a toxic ex-boyfriend, and we need to know that he's not who he used to be. I appreciate the humor you bring to a tough political moment.
No, we can fix him, I think.
That's
we can
at
least
fix
what he thinks about himself.
Well, thanks for joining us, Kate. We really appreciate your perspective. That's going to do it for us today on Rising, Robbie.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. And also check back here tonight as soon as Donald Trump is done speaking. We will have an immediate reaction. We'll have some perspective also from our co-host Amber Duke, who is there at the RNC to let us know what's going on. You won't want to miss that. We'll see you tonight. We'll be up late.
We'll be up late. We're going to try and find some humor in whatever Trump has to say as well. Thanks, y'all. Bye.